Hi everybody, this is Wemmje, and welcome to my Love VFX course, in which I will talk about the creation of my fantasy short film nöck with Nuke Studio. You can find the link to my short film in the description of this video. In this lesson, I will talk about the ACES color workflow that I used for this project, how to set up a Nuke Studio project in ACES, and how you can use LUT files in Nuke Studio.
A while ago, I created a tutorial about the ACES color workflow with Blackmagic raw footage, and taking that footage from DaVinci Resolve to Nuke while working in the ACES color space. In this lesson, I'm going to talk about many of the workflows from that ACES tutorial I made earlier. But now, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of these workflows from that ACES tutorial. If you want some more information about ACES and the ACES settings that I used, you should check out my other ACES tutorial. I'll leave a link to that tutorial in the description of this video. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the ACES color workflow that I used for this project, which consisted of using DaVinci Resolve to convert my Blackmagic raw footage into ACES CG EXRs, comping all of my shots in ACES with Nuke Studio, creating color grades for my shots in DaVinci Resolve and ACES, and applying these color grades as LUTs with OCIO file transforms in Nuke Studio. If you want to know how to convert other video formats into ACES plates, you can check out a video tutorial by Finn Yeager. I'll leave a link to that tutorial in the description of this video. Here's how you can convert your Blackmagic raw footage into ACES CG EXRs. First of all, you need to create a new project in DaVinci Resolve. Then, after importing your Blackmagic raw footage into the project, creating a timeline for it, and editing it to the range you need to go into the Color Management tab in the project settings, set the color science to ACES CCT, make sure the ACES version is set to 1.1, and set your output device transform to ACES CG if you want to export your plates in ACES CG, which is what we're about to do. If you want a detailed explanation about why I chose these settings, you should watch my other ACES tutorial. Now if you press save, and if your output device transform is set to ACES CG, it will make your footage look a bit weird. And again, it should only be set this way if you want to export your plates in ACES CG. To grade your footage in ACES and Resolve, you should set your output device transform to sRGB if you have an sRGB calibrated monitor, or set it to the output device transform that matches to the color calibration of your monitor. Now, you just need to go to the Deliver tab, choose individual clips in the Custom tab, and in the video settings, set the format to EXR and the codec to RGB half PIZ compression. And check the Render at Source Resolution box. In the file settings, you can activate file name uses source name, use 4 digits in the file name, and let each clip start at frame 1001. Now you just need to set the location of your EXRs, click on Add to Render Queue, and then on Start Render. Of course, you can play around with these settings if you don't want your clips to start at frame 1001, or if you don't want to render your footage in its source resolution. These are just the settings that I like to use for my own projects. Now, I will show you how you can take the footage we just exported and create a Nuke Studio project with it, which we will set to ACES. First of all, you need to create a new Nuke Studio project and save it. In this case, I have saved this project as ACES_demo_v001. Then you need to go into the Color Management tab in your project settings, and make sure your OpenColorIO config is set to ACES 1.1. Then you can close it, press Shift-S to open the preferences, and make sure that the OCIO config setting in the Color Management tab is also set to ACES 1.1. Now you can import your ACES CG plate with Ctrl and I, create a new bin for it with Ctrl and B, rename it to Footage, put the ACES CG plate into it, create a new sequence with Ctrl and N, and give it a name. In this case, I will go for ACES Demo again. Then you can open your sequence by double-clicking on it and make sure that your output resolution and frame rate is set correctly, which should be the resolution and frame rate of your footage. Now you can drag your ACES CG plate into your timeline, copy this shot, and paste a duplicate of it into the timeline. So we can pretend like this will be the second shot in our edit. To make it a bit different from the first shot, we can add a transform effect to the duplicate and scale it up to 1.5. Now we can rename these shots by selecting them, right-clicking on them, going to Editorial, and clicking on Rename Shots, which will bring up a new menu. In this drop-down menu, I will leave this as it is set to Sequential Rename. In the Pattern field, I will name the shots according to the sequence, which in this case is ACES_demo_SH ###. And the SH is short for shot. The hashes will be replaced by the shot numbers, which I will set to start at 0, 10, and have an increment number of 10. This increment number of 10 can be very useful in the case of more shots being introduced into the edit, like shot 011 or shot 012, which could be placed between shot 010 and 020. So with these settings, we can press Rename, which will rename our shots in the timeline to ACES Demo Shot 010 and ACES Demo Shot 020. Now we can create Nuke comps out of these shots that will be connected to this sequence by selecting these two shots again, clicking on the Nuke icon, and clicking on Create Comp Special. Here you will be asked to select the valid path for the export route, which is where your shot folders will be exported to. So just select a folder of your choice and press Open. Here we are in the Create Comp menu, for which I've already created a custom preset, which is a replica of the export structure that I used for my short film. I called it Basic Nuke Shot _V002 because it's based on the Basic Nuke Shot preset. The first thing I adjusted in my version of this preset was to get rid of the Nuke folder. Then I added two more folders to the structure, a pre-renders and an asset folder, to have a place for every shot to store my pre-renders and assets like 3D geometries. Then I gave the folders numbers to have them in order, and finally, I changed the render file type of the right node from DPX to ACES CGEXRs with a PIZ compression. The track selection is fine, and not including any handles is also fine in this case. So with this preset or your custom preset selected, you can click on Create Comp. That will bring up this menu that is asking if you want to create a single comp for all selected shots or a separate comp for each selected shot, which I will choose in this case. Now Nuke Studio just created our two comps for our two shots with the respective folder structure. And if we disable the Video 1 layer, select our comps, right-click on them, and select Render Comp, we can see that the connection between the comps and the sequence works just fine. The awesome thing about this workflow is that you can manage your whole sequence from here and just jump into a comp by double-clicking on one. And if we check out the read node of this comp and the color settings of the script by clicking into the DAG and pressing S to open up the project settings, we can clearly see that the read node is set to ACES CG and the script is set to ACES 1.1. Just like we set it up earlier in Nuke Studio. Now I'm going to show you how you can export your color grade from DaVinci Resolve as a LUT file and apply that LUT to your comps in Nuke Studio with an OCIO file transform. Okay, so here we are back in a new version of the Resolve project that is set to ACES, from which we have already exported our ACES CG plate to set up our sequence in Nuke Studio. And now, since we are done with exporting our plate, I have set the ACES output device transform in the project settings to sRGB in order to have a correct representation of the footage and the color corrections, because I am looking at this footage with an sRGB calibrated monitor. I have also prepared a color grade for this clip. So in order to save this grading as a LUT file for Nuke Studio, you have to have all of the nodes enabled that are part of the grading, which is basically a what you see is what you get type of situation. Right-click on the clip's thumbnail, click on Generate 3D LUT, 65-point cube, and save your cube file to a folder of your choice. Now we can go back to Nuke Studio, add OCIO file transform effects to our comps, which you can find in the Effects menu under LUT, and set the interpolation to tetrahedral, because that will result in a smoother display of color transitions when comparing it to a linear interpolation. Then we can set the working space to ACES CC. And finally, we can load the LUT we exported into these file knobs. If we compare the color grading from Resolve with the comp in Nuke Studio, we can clearly see that the LUT and the OCIO file transform matches to the color grading from Resolve. Now I want to talk about some problems of using LUT files from Resolve in Nuke Studio that can break the functionality of this LUT workflow. This LUT workflow does not allow you to use static or animated masks in Resolve, and you can also run into problems when using external color masks for your serial nodes in Resolve that are applied via the mask input. Instead, you can use color and luminance-based masks within your serial nodes, just like in the example I have shown you. Another thing that will break the functionality of this LUT workflow is any type of matte finessing of your color or luminance-based mask in Resolve, like blurring or denoising your mask. That, of course, is a bit limiting when it comes to the grading process, but I believe it's still an awesome way to add flexibility to your post-production workflow. By having your color grades as LUT files in Nuke Studio and being able to render your final pixels out of Nuke Studio instead of DaVinci Resolve, because you don't need to go back into grading every time you create a new version of your comp.
Alright, that was it for the 4th lesson of this course. In the next lesson I will talk about 3D camera tracking in Nuke and how I tracked one of the creature's clean plates for my fantasy short film nöck. Feel free to post any questions you have about my work in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer all of your questions. If you want to see more of these videos, don't forget to subscribe. Again, this is Lars Wemmje. Thank you for watching, and goodbye everybody.